Happy virus season, everybody. Today is March 24th, 2020, and today's guest is Dan Infalt. All right. Today we have Dan Infalt on the podcast, like I said earlier. And for all of you out there that don't know who Dan is, you really need to look him up, and you need to listen to this podcast because he's a wealth of knowledge. He has been around a long time doing things in the whitetail world at a very high level. I look up to Dan. I've been following Dan for the last couple of years, and he comes from Wisconsin, and he does a lot of public land hunting, but he does do a lot of private land hunting as well. And today we're going to be talking about hunting in ag areas. So, not big timber necessarily, but in farm country, little woodlots here and there, wooded fence rows, but like big ag country. So it's something that I am really intrigued in, obviously, because my 1 acre farm is all in ag country. So I wanted to pick his brain, and boy, did I learn a lot. I was actually taking notes as we're recording this. So I'm going to tell you, you're probably going to want a piece of paper and a pencil to take all this notes, because you're going to have to probably listen to it a couple times. But we talk a lot about a lot of things, when it comes to hunting bucks in ag country. Like I said, like where they bed in these small acres. I mean, we talk about even 1 acre size to 10 acre size. So it's the small acres that we're talking about, and how deer use them, how they use them to bed, and how to draw them out and how to get after them. There's a lot of cool information in this one. I recommend, like I said, get something you can take notes, because there's a lot of information in here. So with that being said, I do have to pay the bills here, and I do want you guys to know about some promo codes that we are still running over at Humanimal. So the first one is, if you guys are looking for a new safety harness this year, go to huntersafetysystem.com and type in Kiefer Bros 19 to save 20% off. So KEEFERBROS 19 to get 20% off there. Next is Vapor Trail. So if you guys are looking for anything from Vapor Trail, go there, get 10% off by also typing in Kiefer Bros 19. And then if you guys are looking for an awesome box blind to hunt with a bow or a rifle out of, or a crossbow, whatever you guys want to do, go to Banks Outdoors and then type in Keef, KEEF 19 for 10% off. And don't forget America's Best Bowstrings. Type in Humanimal 20 at the end. So HUMANIMAL 20 to save 10% off your orders, $99 and over. And lastly, for the most comfortable tree stands and the best tree stands, in my opinion, out there, go to millenniumtreestands.com and type in KB5 for 5% off Millennium Tree Stands. So that's it. Now we can keep the lights on. With that being said, let's get over this interview with Dan and get this thing cranking. All right, today on the podcast, I have a new guest, Dan Infalt, coming from Wisconsin. Dan, welcome to the podcast, and thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no problem. For a lot of listeners out there that, my listeners that might not know you, could you just kind of give a brief bio of who you are and what you do with the Hunting Beast Forum, and basically just kind of, you're a legend, honestly. So I've been following you for a while. So in my eyes, you've done a lot of good things for me, and I want to help spread the word and doing what you're doing.
I run the Hunting Beast, which is a forum-based website that's been around for a lot of years, where people talk tactics, and it's not like the other forums. We don't allow any bashing of any sort or any putting people down. We just get rid of those people. So it's a real clean forum, good for kids, good for anybody wanting to be a better hunter. It's more tactics based. We go off topic a little bit on different threads, but the main focus is whitetail tactics. And then I have the normal Facebook pages and stuff that are associated with the Hunting Beast. And I guess the biggest thing I go on is my YouTube page. That's pretty cool. Got some really good videos on there that are tactical, that show you how I go about hunting deer and figuring them out. And I run Hunting Beast gear. So we make tree stands and climbing sticks and such.
That's awesome. And I actually got to not try your climbing sticks out, but I got to hold them and play around with them a little bit. And those things are legit. I'm telling you, for the mobile guy, those things, or not even just the mobile guy, but mobile in general, those things, I really like them. You hit all the nails on the head there, I believe, when you did that. And I really think they'd be beneficial. So that was really cool.
Thanks.
But yeah, to get into today's topic, and I kind of briefly, talked to you about it a little bit before we started recording, but I was telling you about how I have a unique situation here in Michigan, and I've talked about it on the podcast before, so a lot of my listeners are kind of aware of the farm that we're going to talk about. But it's all ag. I mean, they're big ag country, little woodlots here and there, wooded fence rows, and little spots of just little timber. And the thing is the mile section that I'm in, it's only me and maybe one or two other bow hunters that actually bow hunt the mile section. So that's pretty good for here in Michigan. But once gun season comes around, it's a little different story. So, I mean, every guy you see orange all over, but, believe it or not, I actually get better deer on camera and encounters, whether it be an age class or a better antler size, on this piece of ground than I do on my family piece of ground that's only 15 minutes away and it's big timber. So I guess my first question to you is, why is hunting big farm country bucks so appealing to people in your opinion?
I have no idea. Probably because in farm country you see more deer. You can be in the same kind of terrain in woods or hill country and have a deer 100 yards from you and never see it.
Right.
But in farm country, usually the way you're hunting, you see a lot of deer because you see for a distance and they're attracted to the food. So there's a lot more action in farm country.
I gotcha. So, taking about, let's say, a 10-acre piece of timber, let's just say 10 acres or less, and now that's really small. But, with ag fields all the way around it, I know the crop rotation can change and it can leave for better access and, entry and exit with if it's standing corn. But let's say it is all crops that aren't corn and you're trying to access this, entry and exit. Like, what is the best way to go into a piece, like a small piece like that, thinking that there's probably going to be deer in the timber? But, like, what is the best way to access it, do you think, then? Even if there's not really a lot of topography changes as well, if it's just kind of like flatter ground.
Well, the biggest thing is you have to know where the deer are bedding, because deer in farm country usually set up to know when you're there. And like earlier, you were talking about the pressure you have there and how heavy the pressure is during gun season and such. Those deer are not getting to be 4 or 5 years old without learning how to deal with that pressure. So if you got that many gun hunters in that area, they're learning where to hide and how to hide in that terrain. So I think the mistake most people make is they just go try and hunt the stuff. Like they say, oh, I know they're in that block of woods and, everybody's hunting every block of woods around here and I want to give them a little sanctuary. So we'll just call that the sanctuary and we'll hunt the outside of that woods. That's the mistake most people make, because when they go on in there, those deer know when they're there. Now, I hunt a property that sounds a lot like yours. It's got a small, 5-acre square woods in the center. And it's mostly open fields. What we do, and I suggest this with other people too, is we set up a lot of perimeter stands, to the very outside of the property. Not really in such kill positions, but more to see into key areas. And then maybe we'll put a little tiny food plot underneath it just so you have a half-ass chance. But it's really an observation stand. And then we kind of stay out of the areas except for to observe until we see a shooter buck in a pattern. And then we go in for the kill. And what you're going to learn is that these bucks in that type of terrain and with any kind of pressure, and it doesn't really have to be pressure because this comes right back from their instincts from wolves and everything else, is they, in those woodlots like you're explaining, those small 10, 5-acre woodlots with tree lines and stuff, they tend to put the trees to their back and the wind to their back, and they watch an opening. So they'll get to the edge of a field someplace and watch that field downwind of them, and they'll tend to want to watch your access. So when you show up, they don't come out that day, or they go out the back of the woods, or but they're observing you. You know, I found a lot of cases where I'll look at somebody's property where the best buck bedding will be set up to observe where that person parks and walks into hunt every time he goes there. You know, having different accesses in there, having hidden spots to get like to get to your stand hidden is an important thing. You know, without them knowing you're there and knowing the bedding.
Yep, and I like, you know, what you said there about, you know, the bucks usually kind of. I've heard in the past anyway that you've talked about deer bedding on like the edges. Like a lot of people think that they're right in the middle. Now I've actually noticed that on a 1 acre patch of timber that I have. I had a 4-year-old that I was hunting 2 years ago, and I was actually hunting him in. I set up in a fence round in a morning. I didn't want to push in to the timber. It was actually gun season. I figured he'd be in this 1 acre timber, so I just kind of set off with the wind kind of cutting him, like coming. It was coming from me, but it was like just off. It was a just off wind for him, so I knew I was going to be fine. And he would have been coming in the standing beans out in front of me, coming into the wind. So I felt like I was perfect, but I didn't know if he was in there or not. I had to have the mindset of like, okay, he's going to be in there. I have to just, you know, try to get in as close as I could. I went in early in the morning in the dark, sat down, and he never came out. So curiosity got the best of me. After I sat a couple hours, didn't see any deer. Curiosity got the best of me, and I'd been on the road actually hunting out of state stuff for a couple weeks, and I'm like, I didn't really know what was going on. I didn't have a hand on the pulse of what the farm was doing. So it was snow on the ground. I wanted to walk up, and this is where I made the mistake. I wanted to walk up and see what was coming out of the timber into the beans. And when I walked up there, I got to about 20 yards, and I was looking at 20 yards from the timber, and I looked up, and he stood up out of his bed at 20 yards, and he ran away, and I could see it was him, and he was running away from me. I'm trying to get a shot. Obviously, I mean, he was gone in the blink of an eye. So I was immediately mad, but I went in there, and I'm like, this is going to be a learning experience. I'm going to go in there, and there's fresh snow on the ground. I want to figure out what he was doing. Well, just what you said is what he did. What he did is he come in, and he kind of did like what they say, like a J-hook. And I haven't experienced this too much, but like a J-hook into the bed. But I went back and looked at what the wind was doing, and he walked in using the wind to his advantage, and he put his back against a big oak tree. And the oak tree was actually between him and I when I was walking up to him. But my wind, when I started getting more to, like, let's say his south, the wind was he smelt me. He didn't see me or hear me. He smelt me first. And he was bedding. It was like the highest spot in this little 1 acre piece of timber, and it was the biggest oak tree, and he was just back up against it. And I learned a lot, and it's refreshing to hear you say that, because it just kind of, you know, nails home the point that this is what they're doing. Because I guess what I try to do when I'm going into each one of these timbers is I got to go in the mindset that there's deer in there. I feel like I don't know if that's right or wrong. Is that right or wrong? Is that the kind of mindset you got to have?
Oh yeah, of course.
So what would be the best way? I mean, I know this is probably a pretty broad question, but like, if it's a flat timber, let's say it's a 4 or 5 acre timber, it's flat, not a lot of change in topography at all, and not a lot of edge. It's just kind of open. Like, where are you trying to find the best bedding? Are you just looking for beds in general, and then you're just kind of making a mental note?
So when I'm scouting or when I'm hunting?
When you're scouting.
Okay. So when I'm scouting, I'm gonna look at the edges. I'm gonna walk the perimeter, and I'm gonna walk the perimeter that the edges that are gonna include the tree lines. They're gonna include a little brush off to the side, and they're gonna include interior transitions. So you might have like a break inside the woods that's a swamp or something. They might be bedding on the edge of that too. basically, when you get to flatland, elevation is more important than you think.
Yep.
It's the highest spot or the lowest spot that's not underwater. Is usually where the beds are. Which, when you say that, most people go, well, my land's flat. Nothing is perfectly flat. There's going to be a little bit of elevation change. And that struck home when you mentioned that buck you were talking about. She was at that oak tree, the highest point, right?
Yep.
And almost with certainty, if there's any kind of cover at the spots, you'll find good beds at the highest elevation of flatland and the lowest elevation of flatland that's not underwater. So those two spots in the transitions are basically what I would key in on.
Okay. And that makes a lot of sense too, because this spot was just a knoll, literally a knoll about the size of a deer, a little bit bigger than a deer. And, a lot of people, and like myself included, wouldn't think that'd be a transition change really, because you're looking for a big, like a hill or a draw or something, that makes a ton of sense. So that's refreshing to hear you say that as well. So let's say, you're a big mobile hunter. So you go in with a stand on your back and you're hanging and you're hunting a lot. Are you still doing the same thing in these little, patches of timber? Or are you doing more of a set stand kind of thing and just coming back to it?
My set stands are mainly observation stands, but like the farm that I have up the street, that's 70 acres, I have set stands all over the place in there. Some of them, it's the only tree you can be in to hunt a certain spot. But I hunt those like a portable stand. I don't think there's a stand on that farm that I've hunted more than 3 times in a year.
Really? Okay.
So yeah. So I mean, and with that said, we got one stand that I think it was hunted twice, and I sat in another stand and watched a buck come out, sneak out, walk out, and look at that stand, and you can't see that stand. So he knew that there was a hunter there at one point in time. I watched him look for the hunter. They learn those stands so quick. They learn them like we look at sign. They smell where we've been.
Mm-hmm.
And just like we see a rub for, a whole season, they smell us for probably a week, where we've been, that trail. Just because you don't leave tracks or something doesn't mean a deer don't know you were there. So they figure you out. So, that mobile thing is huge. But now when you look at that farm, it's only 70 acres and it probably got 15 stands on there or something, right? That are in set positions. Because when you put a stand up, you just leave it there.
Right.
If you got to put another one up, on private land. So it's amazing to me that when I look back, that all the bigger bucks that I've shot on that farm, or any farm for that matter that I've hunted over the years, have almost always come from an aggressive move, a first sit, a mobile move, or the first time I sat the stand that I put up.
Okay.
However, the majority of bucks I shoot come out of the permanent stands. Do you get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So
definitely.
when I get to a certain age class, I no longer kill them out of those permanent stands.
Okay.
And it's not by choice. I mean, I look at I've actually laid it all out and did like a skew, a graphic.
Yep.
Of it. And out of my top 10 bucks, I think one of them was out of a stand or one or two were out of stands that I had hunted prior.
Okay.
But like 8 or 80% of them that were over 4 years old were shot the first time I ever sat a spot. But then when I looked at the next 10 bucks down that were under that 4 years old range, but were still like mounters.
Yep.
But you're just a shooter.
Right. Yep.
But you're going to mount it, like a nice 10-pointer, but not a giant.
Yep.
Those bucks came out of those stands that are permanent.
Wow.
The majority of the time, because that's the majority of the time where you're sitting.
Yep.
But those big bucks, they pattern you and they figure you out, and people don't get that. I mean, they'll listen to, yeah, I get it. But they don't really get it. I mean, it is to a degree like you wouldn't believe. I mean, you go in there in wintertime and there's snow on the ground, and you look at the giant buck tracks and walk through your woodlot, thinking about you got 70 acres here that's pretty open. and you got 15 stands on here. And watch that buck walk across that whole farm and never go within range of one of those trees. That's not an accident.
Right.
Especially when those stands are in trees where they need to be, like the little funnels, the tight spots where they come out of bedding. If they can get through there without going by one of those trees, it's not an accident. So it's usually those aggressive moves when you kill them. And a lot of times I think, there's deer that watch you climb those trees and you don't even know it.
Mm-hmm.
Because they set up for that. They set up to watch you, The biggest mistake guys make on farmland, by far, is they wait to hunt a food source adjacent to woods for the wind to be in their face. So they want the wind blowing out of that woods to their face. How does that put the deer bedding? The downwind side of that wood lot.
Yep.
Looking at the field.
Mm-hmm. It pains me to hear you say that because I had that scenario last year, and the reason I had this buck pegged. I did. Like, he was coming in, I'm in daylight on a little food plot, like you had talked about earlier, how you put a little bit of food in and just maybe a stroke of luck, that's where, on the edge. So I had a little edge food plot. I mean, it wasn't even an eighth of an acre. It was right on the edge of where the ag meets the timber, and it was where trees didn't grow in the timber. It was like kind of on an inside corner. And the ag this year there was standing beans to the south of it, and then the field to the east of it was winter wheat that would, straw that had already been harvested. So it was nothing. It was just a barren field. Well, this deer was coming in through the west, the timbers to the west. It's only 4 or 5 acres of timber, coming through the timber, hitting the food source, going to the beans. But the thing is he was only coming in when it was a terrible wind for my stand. So I got aggressive one night, and I actually moved around to the other side of the food plot and actually made like a little makeshift kind of in the weeds. I just got down on my butt, really, and just hopefully he would show up. And I had some does come in, and he never showed up. But I couldn't hunt that stand because there's not a lot of good trees for stands around there. And the one good one I had was he wasn't coming in on that wind. So in that scenario, I mean, is there something that you can do a little differently to try to get on him a little bit better, or, make your odds a little better?
Every situation's different. But for me, what I really like to do is, I take it that you're seeing him by trail camera, right? That's how you knew he was coming through?
Yep.
So for me, I think an observation is a good thing. Like, if I know he's coming through there, getting back and getting in a place where I can see down into there from a distance with optics.
Yep.
And watching before I go in and seeing where he's getting up from where he's coming from, and then looking at, okay, if this is what he's doing on this wind, where can I get to and how can I get there? Maybe you got to crawl with a tree in line with you or something. And I've done that.
Yep.
But you have to know that. You have to have that knowledge. And to just say, well, you got to do this or you got to do that would be stupid. I think what you got to do is know what's going on.
Yep.
You know what I mean? You got to get that intel. And that's not to say, there's been plenty of times I've sat back and watched a deer come through a field a certain way, and you go in there and you hunt, and he comes in a different way and busts you. Mm-hmm. It happens. But even if your odds are 1 in 4 that you see him do something, the next day you go sit there on the same wind. If your odds are 1 in 4, that's a hell of a lot better odds than any place else you hunt.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. That makes total sense. Yeah, and I know I kind of hit you with a loaded question because every scenario is different, like you said, and you just I feel like you kind of got to adapt anyway and just try to find. I like the idea of sitting back and glassing because I can do that on that farm. It's so wide open, and just you always get that thought like, man, I should probably be in a stand somewhere, but like sitting back and glassing can be the move that really gets them down on the ground, like just helping you move in and getting that last little piece of intel. I totally get that. So the same farm, I have a question about some scrapes. The same farm, 4 or 5 acres of timber, there was like 16 wide open scrapes on the edge of the ag into the, the field edge basically. What is your take on those scrapes? I mean, are the deer hitting them in the daylight, or are those after dark? Like, when you get that many scrapes, or not even that many, just some good, good open scrapes on field edges, what do you first think, I guess, when it's a smaller timber like that?
Okay, what I'm looking at is I see those scrapes and I know there's a deer on the property. That's what I know.
Yep.
If I see big tracks in them, it gets me a little excited. If I see some big rubs near them, it gets me a little excited. But the proximity to bedding is what's going to tell me whether or not it's a kill spot. Most of the time, areas with a lot of deer sign are not the kill spots. That's not to say not sometimes they are. I mean, when you're talking to farms that small, and if you can assume it came out of that 5 acres, hey, maybe they are going to make that there in daylight. Maybe it is a good spot, but don't set up camp and stay there forever.
Yep.
Give it your shot and then move. Because if you think about it now, what do most hunters do? The overall majority of hunters go out and find a pile of scrapes, or they find some big rubs and they set a stand over it. Are the majority of hunters knocking down big bucks every year? No. So if you hunt like everybody else, you're going to get results like everybody else. The big thing you can do different is if you really think you should hunt over that, hunt over it. But don't camp out there. Most guys will see that sign and they just can't stay away. If it don't happen day one, those deer are figuring you out. And the other thing is, too, I mean, you'll still get trickling deer coming through and stuff, and if you come back and hunt it again and again and again, but what you're doing is you're depleting your odds for shooting that big buck, like 4 or older, and really that's what you're after, right?
Right.
So, I mean, even me, with the success I've had, sometimes I'm happy shooting, a really big 2-year-old or a 3-year-old or something, right?
Yep.
But you know what? I don't want to not be in the game for the giants.
Yep. I totally get it.
I'm hunting the giants, but I might take one that's like 130 or 140 class buck. But I want to be in the game for the giants. I don't want to put myself out of it. And it's a whole different class of animal. And if you start hunting that sign or them spots over and over again, you're going to put yourself out of the game. You ever notice that a guy, if you watch guys that progress as hunters, I'm trying not to go off the topic, but it's just something interesting.
Yeah, for sure.
If you watch them progress as hunters, first, I mean, they just want to kill a deer, and they'll do anything to kill a deer. And it's real exciting until they get a deer. And then all of a sudden they start to lose their excitement there, and they want to get that back, so they start holding out for a buck. They get a buck, they're all excited, and they want a bigger one. Pretty soon they get this thing where they want to shoot a couple of bucks. And then they're like, okay, I'm going to run to this other state, and I'm going to get one. And then they get to a point where they start shooting big bucks on a regular basis. And that's a funny situation, because you'll see the guys that'll get to that point where they start shooting those 125, 130 class bucks every year, and they just stay there forever. They never, maybe once or twice in their career, they'll get a giant. But otherwise, they just keep getting those 3-year-old or large 2-year-old bucks. And then you'll see the other guy who will get to that point, and he'll progress to the next buck. It's because you're hunting a different animal. Just like it was hard to go from that doe to a buck at the time you did it, and from that buck to a bigger buck, going from that mid-range buck to a mature animal is hunting a whole different animal. And if you start trying to kill those in open areas on the edges of fields, not to say you can't, but you got to be a little sly about it. And you try hunting them in this, the same stand over and over and over again, you kill those things. You might do it once or twice, but you're not going to do it year after year.
Mm-hmm.
You're just not going to have the success. So with that said, I mean, those scrapes, maybe there's something, maybe they're not. You throw a stand at it once, give it a shot, see what happens, or throw a cell cam over it, see what happens on the cell cam. I love cell cams because you get that intel right away instead of learning it after the season or after the events happen and thinking, oh, I should have been there. But
right.
There's quite often where I'll have a cell camera in a spot that I think there's no way a mature buck will come in here, and all of a sudden one starts showing up in daylight. And you're like, holy crap.
Yep.
Then you go hunt some spot where you normally wouldn't hunt. What I like them on farms is if you put those on a little tiny food plot right up against the bedding, that you don't touch that food plot. and you don't even go near that camera because it's sending you the pictures, right?
Mm-hmm.
Until the buck you want shows up and starts bedding there.
I'm starting to use cell cams on this farm as well because the timber are so small, and there's two areas, one in each piece of timber that I know there's like a community scrape every year. Like every year there's one there, so I know I always put it there. The deer are used to the camera, and I get, ridiculous amount of bucks on there. And what I like about farm country so much is the bucks, like especially small acres, like I have, what I've seen in my area is you get a lot of different bucks on camera. Like they're just coming through, especially, in those, the pre-rut phase, the first, last 8 days of October into November, like you just see bucks. I mean, these little woodlots can be so deadly if you can sit there and you're in the right scenario with the right wind and you're just getting bucks cruising. I love that. But so that's how I use the cell cam. So now if you kind of answer my question, you'd put up a cell cam if you did have sign right there. So let's say you do some in-season scouting and you find a scrape, whether it be, let's say it's just on a field edge, and are you immediately like, what are the couple of things that you're analyzing right there, to be like, I need to be in there, and how long does it take you to actually get back in there and try the spot?
Well, a scrape don't tell me a whole lot. It doesn't tell me, just if you're just seeing the word scrape, it tells me a buck was there sometime.
Yep.
So I'm going to want to see a track, see something to tell me that it's an animal that's worthy of going after. And then I just know it came through. I mean, it might be bedding a mile from there.
Right.
It might have done that at night. If you think about it too, I mean, people get so fixated on sign. A deer is, up about a half hour, 45 minutes before dark. Doesn't move very far at all, and it's a little suspicious when he gets up, right? So he's not in his normal mode. He's still a little, worried about what's going on as darkness is coming. And then in the morning, he's trying to get back to bed, and usually they're not doing a lot in the morning unless maybe it's rut, right? So when you see that sign, I mean, 95% of the time it's made at night. So what time at night? I mean, was it made at midnight and that deer traveled a mile to get there? So, I mean, I want to see sign, don't get me wrong. But sign alone doesn't do a whole lot for me, especially in the small properties like you're talking.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to know that the buck's there. So a lot of sign, like a heavy trail with the same tracks back and forth, and you have sign. And it's going into an area or it's coming out of an area that I know to be bedding. Now you're talking. So if I know that there's a trail that's coming out of bedding, it's a place I want to hunt, I'm sliding in there and take a look, and there's scrapes coming out of it, rubs coming out of it, and it's coming out of a bed in there. Pretty good chance when I set up, the buck that did that's going to come waltzing out. But if it's just on the edge of a field, that doesn't tell me a whole lot.
Gotcha. Okay. That makes total sense. Now, to kind of further this scenario, let's say you do find, you found this scrape with a track that you're like, it intrigues you. So then you find, let's say, a well-beaten trail that those tracks are in. Are you, and this is in season, are you, with the small areas, kind of a pressured, spot too? You got pressure around you, a lot of hunters, highly pressured. Are you concerned at all about blowing any deer out of there or scent, just kind of, because you got to put the boots on the ground to realize the signs there to even figure out if it's worthy. Mm-hmm. So are you worried about the scent and the pressure that you're putting on it, that you might blow this deer that you see the tracks of out of here?
Well, again, I just want to, before we get into that, I just want to relate back to what we were talking about earlier. Generally, I'm not going to be in that scenario because if it's that small and that delicate of an area, I watched it first and I saw the animal.
Okay.
Or, you know what I'm saying?
Yep.
But now
100%.
Let's just say I was on that trip that you were on for 2 weeks and I come back and I got a couple of days to hunt before gun season starts or something. I want to get in there.
Yep.
I walk in and I find that trail. Okay, now I got to take an educated guess knowing that property, whether or not that buck's going to make it to where I'm standing in daylight. or where is he bedded, and how am I going to hunt him? And I'm going to fall back into what I know about the farm. And like we said earlier, every situation's different. You can't really give an answer without looking at the property and looking at the trail, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Maybe I'd set up right there. Maybe I would set up. There's spots where I know that if I see, good sign in a spot, that I can say, oh man, I need to be a half mile from here. You might think I'm crazy, but I know that area so well that I know where the bucks are coming from. You know what I'm saying?
Yep. Yeah.
Over time. So, every situation is different. It just is.
Is there and I know I'm probably, everybody's looking for this black and white answer, this cut and dry, like you need to do this, you need to do that. But when you're looking at sign, whether it be anytime pre-scouting or in-season scouting, is there a certain amount of sign that it's like, you're like, oh my gosh, like I'm in it. Like this is big buck territory right here. Is there like, a certain amount of it that to really get you going that you have to be there?
It's not about the amount, it's about where it's at. It's the location. And to further that, most of the time when I find a lot of sign, like say you're looking at a bedding area and there's just rubs torn up coming out of there, and it's real obvious, it's usually a 2-year-old, sometimes a 3-year-old.
Okay.
Big bucks just don't leave that amount of sign coming out of bedding areas. And where they do leave a lot of sign is usually where they're at night. One thing that fools a lot of people is like you get these aspens. You know what an aspen is? It's hard bark trees that grow in the low areas.
Yep.
Deer, big bucks can hardly walk past one of those without rubbing them. So you find a patch of those, and they will be tore up like crazy. You'll have 100 rubs in there. And people will think that that's the hottest spot to hunt in the world because of all those rubs. But the deer walk by a patch of oaks just as much. They just don't rub them.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying?
Yep.
It's just that every time they walk over there, they rub them damn things because they like to rub them.
Yep.
So all that sign doesn't really mean jack to me. It just tells me that there's a deer in the area I want to go after, which is important. That is an important piece of the puzzle. If I get into a farm, I've never been there before, and I go scout it and there ain't a rub on that thing that's of a worthy buck, and I don't see a worthy track, I'm leaving. I'm not even hunting.
Yep.
So sign tells me, okay, I'm on the right farm. But scouting puts me in the spots. I gotta have that to hunt sign. I have to have the sign coming out of bedding. If that makes sense.
Yep.
Literally, the point I'm trying to make is most of the time when you kill a mature buck, at least when I do, I'm killing it within 200 yards of his bed. And if I'm getting any further than that, there's no legal right to shoot them.
Right.
So it's all about pushing that limit on the bedding, which is, people don't realize it when they're on a small farm like what you're talking.
Mm-hmm.
Just about every time you see a buck, you're seeing them within 200 yards of this bedding, whether you want to believe it or not, except for during the rut when they start cruising all over the place. They've just gotten up and come out.
So why is it, in your opinion, that, like a 2-year-old coming out of his bed or out of a bedding area and there's all these rubs just coming out of a bedding area? Why is it, a younger deer? Why aren't the mature deer doing that?
Well, they're all jacked up and trying to prove themselves. They're like a teenager coming out trying to prove something. I don't know exactly. I'm not a deer, but I do know that the older ones just start rubbing less. One thing that'll help you out there, and you might raise an eyebrow to it, but I found it to be true, and I've studied it quite a bit, is the height of the rub. Makes a big difference.
Okay.
Because a 2-year-old can do a lot of damage to a tree, and they can damage a tree as big around as your leg, and they can rub the hell out of it. But what you'll see is that rub will be lowered to the ground. It'll be like knee high.
Mm-hmm.
To the center of the rub will be knee high. You might get tine marks up, where your waist is or something, but the center rub portion of a solid tree will be like where your knee is. But when they start getting up to like your thigh, that's when it's like 3 years old. When I start seeing them above thigh high, they're usually mature bucks. And it's proved true with the animals I've killed out of bedding areas that have rubs like that. And from what I've seen on trail cams, studying that. the height of the rub seems to have a lot more to do than the diameter. And when you start seeing all those heavy rubs coming out of those bedding areas, they're usually those low rubs. One thing, though, if you have a higher population of big bucks on your property, you are going to see a higher number of rubs coming out of those bedding areas. Most of the areas I'm hunting have a low density of big bucks. So I have bedding areas that don't even get rubs, and there's big bucks bedding there. That farm I was just telling you about, there's a primary bedding area on there that probably 75% of the time when we see a big buck there, that's where he comes out of. And a lot of years there'll be one or two rubs around it. Some years there's not even a rub around it. I mean, this year I think I've seen 3 bucks that were at least 3 years old come out of that bedding area.
Okay.
And I can't think of one rub I've seen coming out of that bedding area. There's rubs on the farm, but not at that bedding area where they're bedding. The competition is what makes them rub around those bedding areas, as you're competing for the bedding area.
Yep.
And if a mature buck's in there, and say he's 4, and the majority of the bucks in your farm are 2, those bucks, the 2-year-olds, won't bed there. You'll kick them out, and they won't rub there because that's an aggressive move towards him. So that area is not really going to get rubbed because he's got no competition. But where they're bedding, they'll rub. So you might be hunting where all the rubs are, and the spot you need to hunt is not where the rubs are. It's another reason you got to understand the bedding on a farm rather than the sign.
Yep. And that's where I have an issue too with just trying to figure out bedding. I mean, I think every guy might have that too, unless you're, really seasoned like yourself, like, been in a lot of areas where there's, a lot of different types of bedding. But, I can try to figure, I can find beds, I can find, solo buck beds. I found them before on, 1 acre, this 1 acre or this 5 acres.
Mm-hmm.
I found them before in big beds, like, and actually in this 1 acre timber, I did a lot of hinge cutting in it to try to make it very, thicken it up, because it was literally a deer could run through it in 2 bounds, and I needed the deer to come in there and just, need to spend some time there. I wanted them to come in there and have to work around there, and I was going to hunt the perimeters of it, and that's what I've been doing. I don't hunt it much at all. Last year I never sat in it once. I had an Iowa and a Kansas tag too, where I spent all my time, but the year before I only hunted it twice. But in the middle, I made it like a little opening in there, but it's good cover around it. And I actually put a trail cam. It never leaves the tree all year because I wanted deer to be used to it. And I didn't want them to be like, oh shit, what is that kind of thing. That camera has taught me more about bucks and mature bucks and bedding and where and how they move through, thick timber in the last 3 years than I've ever learned in my life. I've had 3-year-old, 4-year-old, 5-year-old bucks in daylight come in here and bed in there. And I had a scenario where a buck came in there, and I have a picture sequence. There's like 30 some pictures. And one day he bedded down right in the middle of this thing, fell asleep. He slept there for 6.5 hours. He got up, stretched out, turned around, bedded right back down. So I went to Weather Underground and I checked out what the historical because I found this after season. This wasn't a cell cam, so I found it after season. I went on Weather Underground. I'm like, what happened that day for him to get up and move and turn? And that's what it was. It was the wind shift. So then the gears are starting to turn. Like, how the hell am I gonna? How am I gonna hunt this? It is 1 acre of timber. It is tiny, but it is thick. And if I'm not there, if I'm coming in at, let's say, noon, 1 o'clock, that deer was bedded there all day. And it was a 3-year-old buck. A buck that I would have killed. It was probably a 130-inch deer. That's what I'm looking for in this area. And I would have busted him out of there. So it's like I almost created something good, but something bad in the sense that it's hard to hunt.
Well, if it's that small, you can't hunt him on the outskirts when he comes out.
Well, I could, but the only thing is my own. I have to get to it. I'm coming through a wide open field every time, so he can see
And
me
he can see you?
coming for a long way away. Yeah, that's my only problem. And I've got a wooded fence row that I can come down, and if the wind's right, I can, because I have permission from the neighbors to just walk on their side of the fence, and they said I could walk on their side of the fence, but still even, it's just, I don't want to do any mobile sets because I always do a set stand in there, because for me to go in there and start clanging around, and I make it sound like I'm really loud, but still, I mean, you're going to make a little bit noise. I like to just climb up and be in. But it's just difficult. He's not the only one. I mean, I'll get, and how you're talking about older bucks coming and taking over, that same year, I had a 4-year-old come in and kick. I've got trail cam videos and pictures of 4-year-olds coming in and kicking 2-year-olds out, and he, like, this 1 acre is his domain, like he doesn't leave it, and that's the same 1 acre that I kicked that 4-year-old up off of during gun season when I walked up there. So it's a magnet. It's just really difficult to hunt.
Do you own the farm?
My brother-in-law does. He's a dairy farmer, and he doesn't hunt at all. So it's basically like he lets me do what I want to do it, as long as I don't touch the crops.
The reason I ask is because if you could create cover or something so that you can get to a spot where you can hunt would be probably ideal.
Yep. Yeah, and that's, I was gonna, maybe do some switchgrass, or just go in there and just on one of the edges. So it'd be the north edge. I can come in on the north edge, and there's some good trees on that edge, and I can shoot basically the whole 1 acre, and I can climb up a tree. And if something's bedded in the middle where this is at, I can almost get in the tree without anything seeing me or hearing me. But I would probably have to go in there and do a couple more hinge cuts, just to do like a slash cut, just for like a wall, just so I can walk in on the edge, which I could do for sure.
Mm-hmm.
But
yeah.
It's crazy. I did not expect the deer to use that as much as they have and how they do. I mean, and so this is another question I have for you. What I hear and read a lot from guys is they say bucks and does, they won't bed together, which I get that. But this little open patch, like there'll be, like today I'll have a group of 8 does bedding in it, like right in this little, it's like a 10 by 10 patch. It's just a little opening. The next day I'll have a 4-year-old bedding in it, buck. Is that something that like is like anomaly, or is that just like,
No, I have that all the time. Usually if it's group doe bedding, it's a little different than the bucks. But it's not far from it. But lone does and does with fawns, like a doe with 1 or 2 fawns, it's not in a group, will bed right into buck beds when the bucks aren't there.
Really?
Oh yeah, yeah. When I talk about doe bedding specifically, I'm talking about a group of does.
Okay.
And they will bed more open and more in a circle fashion, each facing a different direction, and work as a group to watch for oncoming danger. But often those doe bedding areas will be real close to buck bedding areas. And when that's the case, that can be an incredible spot during rut.
Yep. And that's another scenario I have. I can't hunt this during the rut because my job, I produce hunting television shows. So I'm always gone filming or hunting somewhere. I haven't hunted the rut in Michigan since 2012. So all my time has to be, early.
Maybe you're making a mistake as a filmer there, because me personally, I'd rather watch you kill one in Michigan than Iowa.
Yeah. Well, and this year last year I had an Iowa tag and killed a deer of a lifetime. He was a 186-inch, just 7.5-year-old giant. I figured him out in 6 days and ended up killing him. It was awesome. It was so much fun, so cool. A deer of a lifetime, and a deer that a memory I'll have forever. And then in Kansas, I got to kill a really cool buck, older deer as well. But that was like the year I'm like, okay, I'm going to go all in, and I'm going to hunt a little bit out of state this time. And then, so this next year coming in Michigan, I got a deer pinned down. I know he's alive, and he was pretty good last year, and I think he's going to be even better than this year. But that's my goal, is to kill something in this area on camera. That's a 3 or 4 year old, it's a good deer. And my goal is to kill it in this 1 acre. Like that's my whole goal this year. So yeah. And that's the other thing too. And I've heard you talk about, hunting it the right way and staying out of these little areas, because the pressure is what kills these little areas. And you got to strike at the right time. So
I'll tell you something once, just kind of go on to your topic there a little bit. The biggest buck I ever killed, I watched that buck bed in the same spot over and over again for 2 years. Every time there's a west wind, he was bedded there. I picked up one of his sheds out of the bed, and it was an old overgrown pasture that had grass all the way around this willow tree and a couple of brushy trees. And the willow tree was kind of bent over and made like a little bridge, and you'd bed right underneath that bridge. And you could sit back from a distance and watch him get up and move, because it was a real open area, kind of like what you're talking, right?
Yep.
And it just frustrated the hell out of me because I couldn't get near him. And there's a couple times where, you'd think about, what can I do? What can I do? And that's the kind of mind I got. I'm always kind of like contemplating how to make a move. What do I got to do? And I try to talk myself into making some sort of move. I mean, I can't just let it sit that I can't kill the thing or something. I can't just give up. So there's a couple times where I'd walk past this thing on this dirt road where I'd step off and just look at the trails. And if you stepped off that trail by 10 feet when that deer would come through, if you'd see it from where you're sitting, he would freak out when he'd hit your scent off of the dirt road.
Really?
It's like he was okay with you walking that dirt path, but if you step 10 feet off of it, he'd freak out. So I thought about trying to hunt the dirt road, but there's like no trees there, no nothing. And then I started thinking, well, what if, kind of wind shift one day or something, and the wind would change, and could I get in there? And I started thinking that maybe I could crawl up with a gun and get up to these cattails and kill them. And on Thanksgiving Day during our gun season, we're all getting ready for Thanksgiving, and a front moved in and a west wind turned to east. And I thought, holy crap, I got to go kill that thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I pissed my whole family off going out there. But I literally put a little patch of cattails that's, smaller than a car between me and that deer. And I bungeed a shotgun to my back, and I crawled on my hands and knees through water. And I even had to break ice up to those cattails. And I got that gun off my back, and I rose up on my knees. Here the buck is, I think it was 20, 30 yards.
So you had no idea he was there? You just were hoping he was there?
Not until yeah, exactly.
Holy cow.
Exactly. When I rose up, he's there, and his eyes got real big. He looked at me, I looked at him, and I shot him right in his bed.
Wow. And
all I could think was, for 2 years, I could have did that with my bow, but I never had the balls to do it.
Yep.
I never believed in myself. And the only thing stopping you from killing a buck in that little woodlot is believing in yourself. I believe that you could find a way to crawl up to there, get close, get somewhere around there, and do what you got to do. The trick is making the right move at the right time, because the first move is going to be your kill move.
Mm-hmm.
Because once that thing knows he's being hunted, good luck. But if you could, set up some cell cams, or sit back and observe a few times, get a pattern going. Then when you think you got things right, if you got to crawl on your hands and knees, or if you got to get in there, 2 hours before daylight and climb a tree and go way out of your way so he doesn't cross your scent trail, there's always a way. You just have to put your mind to it.
Yeah. And that kind of leads to another question too, is like you said you go in there before daylight in the morning. Is that something you would do? You're going through, ag fields to get there. Would you push the fact and go in there in the morning and do that?
Well, it depends. If I thought he was feeding in those ag fields, no, I wouldn't do it. And if it wasn't rut, I wouldn't do it.
Okay.
I would stick to evenings. A lot of times those bucks are bedded before daylight, even during rut. But during rut, what they'll do is they'll get back up and they'll move again once daylight comes and like go look for some does or something, then bed again. But you find them bedding before daylight pretty consistently, mature bucks.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So evenings are probably better, but.
All right. Yeah, that's what, and I mean, my favorite time to hunt, honestly, is probably those last couple weeks of October, especially here in Michigan. That's when I've seen the biggest deer on their feet in my area here in Michigan. Is just they like, and everybody else knows, they just get stupid. And
for me, about a week to 2 weeks before everybody says it's peak rut time to hunt, is my favorite time to hunt, no matter where you're hunting. That's when people with skill, when skill meets deer that move earlier, you still pattern them, you can still hunt them, you can still do good. And where people need that rut time is when they need a deer that just does stupid shit and they can kill them out of any tree.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
But if you got skill before they actually go into rut and they're starting to get worked up, they start exposing themselves. They start leaving sign coming out of the bedding areas. They start, coming out earlier and moving further, and they get easier to kill. So I really like that last 2 weeks of October too.
Yep. That's awesome. Well, very cool. Dan, I want to be conscious of your time. I know we've been on doing this an hour. I feel like we only scratched the surface, but I appreciate you coming on and doing this, and I'd really like to do it again sometime and maybe dive in deeper with some other tactics and other topics, because the bedding thing to me is, I want to learn more about bedding, and I feel like I'm learning every year. And I think you're the guy to learn from. You're the legend of the bed hunters that I know of. So, but thank you very much for doing this and taking your time out on this evening to do it.
No problem. It was fun.
Where could everybody find you? Can you kind of give a plug of all your social channels and everything, and your YouTube channel again? Like, where can everybody find your content and all your information?
Yeah, just Google Dan Infalt or Hunting Beast, and I'll come up everywhere.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much, Dan. And again, hopefully this next year treats you well, and maybe will it find you back in Michigan again? I know you were in Michigan last year. Are you going to come over again?
I might. See where the wind blows me.
There you go. Well, thank you very much, man, and you have a good evening.
All right, you too.
I mean, information overload. I love it. You guys are probably going to have to listen to this again. Hopefully you guys took out of this podcast as much as I did, because there's a lot of information in here, and I loved it. So thank you to Dan for coming on and doing this. If you guys could please go to iTunes, leave a 5-star rating. So go down to those little 5 stars, click the 5-star, that'd be huge, and leave some feedback, a little comment there. You can make it anonymous as well, so nobody has to know who you are or what you're doing. I just need some comments. So appreciate it, guys. Also, don't forget, go to Kiefer Brothers _Humanimal YouTube channel to check out all of our stuff on that side of things. A lot of cool videos. Stay healthy out there. I know this COVID-19 still going around, so what better way to binge podcast and then go to our YouTube channel, subscribe to it, and then also watch all the content. So thank you guys for that, and we'll be right here next episode, right on the Fall Podcast.